Hey Geo Nerds. Here I am today out at Yamanto and I'm walking across the West Fault right here. This is Sale Yard Street and that's Hall Street. It runs right through here and heads off that way. And what we're doing today is we're going to have a look at the faults in Ipswich, because there is a lot of faults in Ipswich. Casting no aspersions, I'm talking about geological faults. You've all seen the thumbnail, is Ipswich faulty? Yeah, you got to have a go. Anyway, there is a very complex line of faults and they lead all the way to New Zealand. Yeah, for sure. I'll explain later. So what we're going to do now, we're going to have a wander around Ipswich, look at where these faults express themselves. I'll warn you now, you're not going to see any Grand Canyons. We'll have a look at the different geologies. I'm not going to get into Ipswich Geology today because, you know, I'm 63. It's going to take a while. We'll look at the geology as it relates to the faults, and we'll also look at how the history of Ipswich is wound into its geology with its history of mineral extraction. And I think from there, we should get something interesting out of it. So anyway, hang in there. It's going to be fun. And of course, if you dig the vibe, like and subscribe. And you know what I'm going to say. Let's rock that way.
Well, here we go, folks. We're heading out towards Ipswich, just going across Kenmore here, Chapel Hill. We're going to have a look at the West Ipswich Fault system and the faults in Ipswich, the geological faults. So is Ipswich faulty? Yeah, you bet it is. Let's have a look. We're just spinning up to the south here, going to go in across Denmark Hill, despite how many times I called it Deebing Hill, which it is not. Deebing Street is on Denmark Hill. You'll have to forgive me. So we're just going to spin around to the north here, and the fault's pretty much right in front of us here, and it heads, there are a number of faults make up this system, which is why it's called a system, and it heads up and it goes right up the Esk Valley in front of us there. You can see the Esk Trough in front of us, that low section that runs away, and there is another fault system up there called the Great Moreton Fault System, which this is really part of. So anyway, let's have a look at what a fault is. Well, folks, what is a fault? Well, a geological fault is a fracture or a zone of fractures between two rock blocks, allowing them to move relative to each other. That's the technical description, and there are four basic types of faults. So you've got a normal fault, and in fact, that's what we're dealing with up here in Ipswich. You have a strike-slip fault, which is like the San Andreas fault, and in fact the North Pine fault system in Brisbane is a strike-slip fault. You have a reverse fault, which is a normal fault, but doing it the hard way, where the hanging wall, which is the upper bit, is pushing itself up over the other one. And you have a thrust fault, which a lot of the undersea faults where one continental plate subducts under another, those are thrust faults. They're very dangerous faults, actually. So let's have a little look at some examples of some of these faults. Well, folks, this is the most famous fault in the world, the San Andreas fault. It's a strike-slip fault, and the stuff on the left of your screen is moving north at between 25 and 30 millimeters a year. Quite a dangerous fault, tearing California in half. This is in New Zealand. This is the Alpine fault. This is also a strike-slip fault, and it's moving between 30 and 35 millimeters a year. It's one of the fastest moving faults on the planet, and they're due for a big one soon here, I assure you. Now, this is part of the West Ipswich Fault system, and it is not a strike-slip fault. This is just to the east of the Mount Juliet roundabout, And this is undocumented, but as you can see, it's definitely there. So we'll talk a little more about this later, and I'll show you where it fits into the maps. Well, folks, here we've got a fairly large diagram of southeast Queensland. As you can see, there's the North Pine Fault, Brisbane, Moreton Bay, you can see all that. And you can see the little town of Esk, the Great Moreton Fault system is marked there, and also the West Ipswich Fault system. And as I say, it's a system, as you can see, it's quite a few faults. Here we have an even larger look at southeast Queensland. As you can see, the interesting parts of the North Pine Fault system and the Great Moreton Fault and the West Ipswich Fault system. It is not a coincidence these run in the same direction. And the key to it is that area masked the Esk Trough, because it truly is a dropped piece of land. Let's have a look at why it's like that. Let me introduce you to the concept of Horst and Graben. You see these all around the world. They're sometimes called basin and ranges. But if you take the crust and stretch it, and it stretches to the point where it gives, you'll see some faults form and the grabens will drop, and the Horsts will actually stay where they were. And the Esk Trough is a graben, quite a large graben, in fact. Well, folks, this is what it looks like from space today. You've got the Australian continent, bit of Tassie there, New Zealand, that big white or light blue area around New Zealand. That is becoming known as Zealandia. They think they're going to call it a continent, even though it's under the water. More about that later. But a little while ago, 100 million years or so ago, it wasn't like that. It was like this. It was Gondwana, but in its final phases, it was starting to break up. And when it broke up, what we now called New Zealand and Zealandia broke away from the coast of Australia, what is now Australia, like this. And when it did, it opened the Tasman Sea as we know it today. And in the process, it stretched the crust on the east coast of Australia. Doesn't need to stretch it much, because this stuff, as you can imagine, doesn't stretch. But New Zealand racked off at a very high rate of knots, and it stressed the whole east coast of Australia. All the faults in northern New South Wales, the faults in Queensland are from that time. Now, it's a little hidden because there's volcanism on top of it. All of the super volcanoes down here, the Mount Warning one, all the main range stuff, all the Glasshouse Mountains, all of the Bunya Mountains, the Springbrook, all that came well after this. So this was already stretched by the time that volcanism came along, which is why the Esk Valley's got a few mountains in it. They're volcanoes. Well, folks, time to have a look at Ipswich. Here's the geology map. Of course, it looks like a painter's drop sheet. It's actually very complicated, which is why I don't do a lot of geology work up here. Pink bits down the bottom are volcanics. I'll pull out everything that's over 200 million years old. So what you're seeing here is old rocks. Ipswich has got some very old rocks in it. These were formed back in the Gondwana days. This is where all of the mineral production comes from. Here's a structural map. This is distorted of Ipswich to give you an idea where the seams are, and you can see the West Ipswich Fault. Here's a mining map of it. This is more to scale. So what we're really interested in is the West Ipswich Fault system, which is this here. It's a major fault, but there are lots of other faults that are part of this system, as we have seen and we will see. By the way, if anyone knows anything about this thing, Gilliver's Fault, flick it my way. Map of Ipswich, black lines, faults everywhere, absolutely everywhere. But they follow the rock types. Weird that, hey? Because what we're looking at is some folds that have been cut through by erosion over the years. This is called the Barellan Fault system, runs from almost Carolee right back into Ipswich, North Ipswich. Well, the early diggers knew about these, of course, because they encountered them in their collieries. This is the town. Denmark Hill at the bottom, the Ipswich Showgrounds. Big fault running right through West Ipswich, as you can see. There's a join there. And of course, that red line is a fold, actually, right through the middle of the hill, right through the reservoirs on Deebing Street on Denmark Hill. How about that, eh? I thought I'd put the regional magnetics up for you. As you can see, there's been some volcanism in this area. I'll zoom in a little and just overlay the faults and the folds. The red are the folds, the blue are the faults. And as you can see, there is a trend in the faults. I don't think all of this magnetism is related to volcanism. I think some of it is just related to the age of the rocks, but certainly some of it is definitely volcanic. You can see the Brookfield volcanics there, plain as day. Well folks, here we have a 1944 RAAF photograph of Ipswich. And as you can see, she's grown a bit since then, as everywhere. Down the bottom here, we can see all of the mineral extraction going on Denmark Hill. We're going to walk around that in a little bit in a minute. You see one of the reservoirs is there. Head up north, the railway workshop's huge, of course. That's the little quarry we're going to have a look at in a few minutes, some of the rocks there. And just for shits and giggles, here's the old Mount Crosby railway line. Still there, still operational. Amazing stuff. Anyway, let's have a bit of a walk around and have a good look at some of these rocks. Folks, we're up on Deebing Hill in the Switch. And what we're doing is we're just going to have a bit of a look at the geology on this hill, purely because this town has a history of, well, they call it mineral extraction, but coal's not a mineral. So, but anyway, it certainly is. Deebing Hill was the home to some of the earlier collieries, and also they went for a long time. I'll put some photos up. That's right in the middle of town, right in the high diddle. So anyway, let's have a look. It's now a nature park and it looks fantastic. Let's have a bit of a look together. It's up on Deebing Hill there, folks. Piece of this beautiful fine ardenite mudstone. It's probably not in situ. This place has been well worked over the years, but it's definitely from around here. No one's going to bring stone into this place. Beautiful stuff. Beautiful sandstone column here, people. Upon Deebing Hill, a memorial to Governor Blackwell, in the memory of Governor Blackwell. And it's actually a drinking fountain that actually still works. How about that? Sorry about the shadow. Looks like a nice piece of sandstone. Can't quite work out where it's from. It doesn't look like Helidon sandstone. It's probably from around here. There's a lot of sandstone in Ipswich that was quarried, good enough, all over the place. So who knows? This is a really nice fine sandstone though. It's been here a while. It was built in 1878 down in town and moved up here later on, but not doing too bad. Sandstone's lasting longer than the mortar is. Not uncommon. It is exfoliating though. You know, that's onion skin exfoliation. Sculptors like sandstone because it's soft. How long it's going to last? I'm doing alright so far. Onwards. Well, there you go. Thank you, Urban Utilities. Do you work for me or do I work for you? I get a bit, confused. Hey, Alan and Walter, if you're listening, let's try these guys in the court of public opinion. This was one of Ipswich's top tourist locations. Used to bring everyone here, and it's closed. Apologise for the inconvenience. Pig's bum. Anyway, we'll just do it from here. Everything you see out there is on the other side of the West Fault. Everything.
So there you go, and we're on the eastern side. And there's a Maggie. Hey Maggie. No, I ain't got any food for you today, sorry. Oh, you found your own. Well folks, we're here up at North Ipswich, Denman Park or Denman Reserve. And what we're having a look at here is there's a fairly good cross-section of the Tivoli Formation. And there's a lot of coal extraction, a lot of collieries and mineral extraction done in this particular formation. And right at the bottom of the hill here, there's the West Ipswich Fault. So let's go along. A lot of this rock we're seeing around us here has unfortunately been just placed here, but I'm sure we can find some of the stuff that's in situ. So let's have a look at it. So folks, there's quite a bit of the Tivoli Formation showing through here at Denman Park, and I'm going to go over and have a closer look at it. This is what I was hoping to see. Most people don't know this is here because you can't see it from the road, but it is actually quite worth coming down and having a look at it. Again, an amazing little section here through the Tivoli Formation. Sandstone, loose conglomerate, river gravels, sandstone, sandstone, sandstone. Lovely stuff. And you probably can't see it, but I'll go back a bit and get an angle. This is dipping at about, I'd say 10-15 degrees into the ground. I'll give you an idea of the dip on this formation. There's a tree that's growing fairly vertical. You can see the dip. Now, keeping in mind, all of these beds are laid down flat. They are laid down essentially horizontally. So this has been warped and bent by all sorts of things over the years. And right there's a fault. Let's go and have a look at that. So we can see here all the strata is basically horizontal, and there's a vertical line running straight through it here, heading back into the strata in that direction. Faulted straight down the road, actually back towards Ipswich. There's a few more of them here as well. Well folks, this is a cutting out on the Centenary Highway just near White Rock, just to the east of the Mount Juliet Drive roundabout. This is when it was first done. It was pretty clean. I've got another shot of it later on, but as you can see, the fault is clearly visible in this cutting. It's not as simple as it looks, although we can see a fault there. We're looking at a two-dimensional representation because that's what a cutting is, but unfortunately that strata is fairly three-dimensional. It's actually sort of tilting back towards us, but it is a very clear illustration of that particular fault, which by the way is not marked on any of the maps. This is where it is if you want to go and see it. Obviously, if you're going to stop and have a look at this thing, be safe. All right, that road is vicious. Be safe. That's all I can say. And here's an image of the cutting as it was the other day when I was out there. So you can see it's weathered, and it looks a little more complicated here. It looks like it could be, in fact, a thrust fault. But I don't think it is. I think it's just a normal fault that's really old, and what looks like a thrust fault, I'll just mark that here, is actually, I think, just the strata that was coming towards us finally weathering down and breaking off. Because if you look in the early photograph, that's not there. Anyway, I think this is probably the best illustration of a fault I could get in Ipswich you can actually go and see. So anyway, but be careful, that road is dangerous. Well, geo nerds, is Ipswich faulty? Of course it's not faulty, it's an awesome town. The switch is cool, man. I lived up there for 30 years, my kids were all born there, it's a great place. Is it full of faults? Why, yes it is. And as you just saw in that video, there's probably a lot more than we will ever discover. Geology is very complicated. But it has a history of mineral extraction, history of collieries. There, I never used the M word in the whole video. Anyway, bumped into an old mate of mine up there on the street. I said, hey, give me 6. Sorry, Ipswich joke. Even after that, I just lost all my Ipswich friends. You dig the vibe, like and subscribe. It's free. And don't forget to keep rocking, because T-Rocks is out.